What's up gamers, Dreamcastguy here, and this is going to be a very hyped video today because somebody just decided to leak a very big and it seems like very legit picture of the PlayStation 5. So what I want to do is actually go through this photograph piece by piece and really try and figure out if it's real and what we can actually figure out from this very interesting little leak. Now first and foremost, I have this up on screen. We need to just acknowledge that this is probably not at all what the PlayStation 5 is going to look like. Okay, so prototypes, dev kits, a lot of times these systems look way radically different from what ends up actually going on store shelves. There's been rumors about things like when they were actually working on the PlayStation Vita way back in the day, they were tinkering with different versions of it that would actually maybe connect to a TV or have an HDMI out. When they were working on, like Nintendo does this a lot. Nintendo likes to change their systems a lot during development. Like I have the Game Boy Advance SP right here, or the Game Boy Advance right now. There was talks that when they were working on the 3DS or the 2DS, like a lot of times when they were working on the DS systems, they were experimenting with different ways to make the screen fold or stick or stay, and there were actually versions of the DS that apparently were actually pretty easy to break, and they kept trying to redo it until they had the strongest version. So when I look at this, I definitely think that this photograph is real. There's definitely some details in this that make it seem quite apparent that somebody was not supposed to put this picture out. But additionally, the key thing here is that this is an original prototype. This is definitely a Model 1 dev kit of a PlayStation 5. That is why it has so many vents, so many USBs, so many things on here that kind of make it look like it was made in a giant rush. Now, I think that there's probably going to be multiple versions of this in the future that'll be popping up, but it's also kind of shocking because I don't think I've ever seen somebody leak such an early version of a prototype before the console is even shown. But I think that this picture is real because of one main thing, which is actually right here. As you can see, there's a little bit of an added overlay here where there is, let's just zoom in a little bit here. Oh God, okay, there we go. Go to 100%, okay. As you can see here, there is a model number, a rather large model number that probably says who this was issued to. Sony is pretty top secret. They like to keep their details and the things they're working on completely under wraps until they're pretty much ready for full production. So the fact that they actually are giving out so many different dev consoles says to me that they're currently trying to make sure that they have a ton of PlayStation 5 launch games. Obviously, your launch lineup is incredibly important. You need to make sure that when your games come out and your console comes out, people have to buy it. They have to get in line. They have to try and be there on day one if they want to be the first people to experience the giant future of gaming that you have in mind. But when I see this, I honestly believe that what's being covered up here is probably a direct name. There's probably somebody's name, and like this could be actually like a studio, then it says like Robert Pattinson, and then it says like Naughty Dog Dev. And the reason they do that is to try and stop leaks like this. You can see that there's actually a little bit more of that where some other big piece of identification numbers also had to be censored out here. So it's funny to me because that actually says quite a bit about what this system is. Now, there is a ton of vents all across this system. There's huge bays here, huge bays here, and huge bays here, while the top and the bottom are relatively flat. This is actually one of the main things that makes me think that this is a very early Model 1 dev console. A lot of times, these systems start out incredibly clunky because they're just supposed to be durable. You need to be able to beat them up and throw them down and have 80 of them in one's room while everybody's trying to work on stuff. Because, obviously, this has to last. This is a very rigid piece of technology, and it needs to be durable enough to have people, well, making games guerrilla style, like just throwing stuff out there. So a lot of times, dev consoles are actually tougher than other stuff. Now, here is where we really get to the big things that I actually think are the most important, which is, I really think this prototype 1 is a huge, huge, important flag that we need to talk about. So, a lot of times, there have been a little bit of rumblings that perhaps Sony is working on multiple versions of the PlayStation 5 right now, and this is actually very, very common. A lot of times when huge companies are trying to create the next generation of tech, they have way different spread out pieces of technology. They want to actually have multiple teams working on multiple SKUs and stuff, not because you want to sell like 5 different versions of the PlayStation 5, but you're basically experimenting as to how you can make the best console for the lowest price. How can they actually make this something where people are going to want to buy it, but also have enough horsepower and stuff to make it where developers are going to stick with it? We actually saw this way back in the day with Dreamcast. There were like a couple pretty much finished prototypes, completely different in almost every way, of the Dreamcast, Project Katana, before we got the one that was actually released. And when I see this, it definitely makes me think that we're still currently probably in the early testing phases of the PlayStation 5. It's probably actually, if I just had to speculate, there's probably a couple different versions of the PlayStation 5 that are being very heavily tested right now to try and figure out which ones are going to be the easiest to program for and make games for, but also how much can they sell it for. I've actually talked about this a little bit, which is, I am afraid if the PlayStation 5 ends up being released at over $500 in cost, I do think that it will be a huge, giant flop. Mostly because even if people love systems, even if they really want to get access to those exclusives, half of $1,000 is a huge chunk of change, which I do believe is part of the thing that's actually dramatically hurt the launch of the Xbox One. So when I see this, I think that we're still in the early phases. Stuff about like these model numbers, a lot of these countings, a lot of this stuff here like the network access, a lot of these lights and switches and toggles, the fact that the disc slot is so large, I definitely believe that this is actually still a good sign. I mean, if you just look at this, it's clearly a very raw prototype that's heavily in use. I mean, they're pretty obviously, whoever leaked this was probably from their own office. This was not tweeted out by a janitor. This was actually leaked by a developer currently developing PlayStation 5 games. But to me, that is a great sign. I like the fact that there's so many USB ports, and it definitely kind of brings to mind the fact that this thing is definitely in the works. They are definitely just going full blast right this very second to actually make some PlayStation 5 games. I'm still kind of just interested into how this was leaked and how it got out here, because honestly, somebody's getting fired over it. Sony knows their own stuff. Sony ninjas, Nintendo ninjas are kind of like the joke. I definitely think that whoever tweeted this out is probably going to get the axe, but I'm glad that it's out here because it is very, very cool. I'm thinking still that we're not going to see the PlayStation 5 look anything like this. Developer consoles always look dramatically different in general, but this thing is crazy town. It's like a giant V. It looks like it's ready to take off and go into flight. But if it does, I'd honestly be okay with it. I kind of like the fact that it's going to be released in 2020, which is not too far away now, but it's still kind of fun to think about. This is the future of video games. Like, we're at a time now where we're making practically photorealistic graphics and big open world RPGs that are managing to do things that were never before possible. I mean, one of the things that's definitely the most crazy to me is the fact that things like Final Fantasy XIV playing on my PS4, this is a massive MMO that's connected to the internet and has millions and millions of players across the globe and plays so easily with my PS4 controller. I actually love the idea of Sony kind of embracing the cheesiness of this cybernetic future and making a console that kind of looks ridiculous. Whatever it is, my big thing is just make it cheap. If this is real, which it really does seem like it is, that's crazy, and I'm kind of curious what the final version looks like. What is it going to be? What is it going to cost? And really, what is it going to play? Well, this is just going to be my off-the-cuff thoughts. I actually saw this picture 24 hours ago, but I wanted to just kind of mentally let it sit and boil in my brain for a bit before I really kind of dug into it. And I'm hyped. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. And developers, keep leaking the good stuff, alright? Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.